Meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 31 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. Just one second. Sorry, there is just echo in the room, so it will be checked before we proceed. And I'll suspend the meeting for a minute. Number 31 of the Standing Committee on Science and Research. We are meeting today to commence our study on the implications of the Canada-China Preliminary Joint Agreement on Canada's electric vehicle sector. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either English, floor, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our witnesses for the first panel today. Today we are joined by Guy Saint-Jacques, former ambassador of Canada to the People's Republic of China, and he's joining us by video conference. Welcome. We are also joined by Michael Kovrig, the founder of the Global Network for Strategic Effects. Welcome, Mr. Kovrig. All the witnesses will have 5 minutes for their opening remarks, and then we will go to the round of questioning. And with that, we will start with Mr. Saint-Jacques. You will have 5 minutes. Floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Bonjour, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your invitation. I will discuss 3 topics with you today. China has become a major source of high-tech products, the issue of Chinese EVs in Canada, and finally, the lessons we must learn from this. President Xi Jinping hopes to complete China's great rejuvenation by 2049, the centenary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. Aware of the countries facing a demographic crisis with a deficit workforce, launched in May. He launched a Made in China 2025 strategy. It deals with 10 technological sectors, but also he is looking towards eliminating foreign competition. China Morning Post confirmed that 84% of the objectives had been achieved. These sectors include renewable energy, solar, wind, nuclear, high-speed trains, telecommunications, aerospace, robotics, new materials, and so on. These successes were achieved through a combination of tax breaks, tax holidays, subsidies, and a forced technology transfer. and, of course, technology theft, including here in Canada. However, the policy has led to industrial overcapacity, particularly in batteries and semiconductors. This overproduction, heavily subsidized, is now feeding a massive trade surplus. For example, of the roughly 50 electric vehicles manufactured in China, only 3 on 4 are profitable.
Makes high-quality products at very competitive prices. The decision of the previous government to follow blindly the Americans by putting 100% tariffs on Chinese EV was ill-advised. We should have followed WTO rules and do a full study of the subsidies provided by the Chinese government. The result would have been tariffs more similar to those applied by the EU. I can understand why Mr. Carney wanted to improve the relationship with China. It is too important a player to ignore. Getting rid of the Chinese tariffs on Canada and seafood, 2 of our important exports to China, was important. The counterpart decision to allow 49,000 Chinese EVs per year in Canada makes sense and will also help to reduce our emission of greenhouse gases. Attracting Chinese EV manufacturers to Canada would help to compensate for the loss of jobs resulting from U.S. car manufacturers moving their production to the U.S. following pressure by President Trump. When GM Canada went to Shanghai in 2009 to manufacture Buick Regal automobiles, the Chinese insisted that the Chinese content in these cars would gradually increase to reach 100% after 10 years. The Canadian government should impose a similar requirement on Chinese manufacturers that are willing to set up shop in Canada. Now, in terms of lessons for Canada, the 5-year plan adopted by the National People Congress at its annual meeting last month calls for more investment in new productive forces like robotics, quantum physics, new drugs, and in manufacturing. This means that by 2030, 45% of the world manufacturing capacity will be in China. This will lead to more trade friction and the gradual erosion of our own manufacturing capacity if we are not careful. The government should therefore work with allies to make joint démarches to force the Chinese to open more their markets to foreigners as promised when they joined the WTO in 2001. We should also oppose the dumping of Chinese products here and launch WTO inquiries as required. Finally, the government should also take more measures to prevent the theft of technology and adopt strategies to help our high technology sector to progress. We also need to clarify rules on Chinese investment in Canada. Merci, je serai heureux de répondre à vos questions.
Thank you. I'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. And with that, we will pass it on. I will now move to Mr. Kovrig. Please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you for this opportunity to advise the committee. Opening Canada's market to electric vehicles from the People's Republic of China should be assessed not as a normal trade agreement, but rather as a tactical gamble that risks deep entanglement with an increasingly totalitarian one-party state. Unless this trade is tightly constrained, it's likely to undermine Canada's industrial base and technological development and weaken national security and policy-making autonomy. EVs and batteries are a strategic industry. The Chinese Communist Party knows that very well and has been pouring enormous resources into the sector in a bid to achieve global dominance of advanced technology and manufacturing. Behind every Chinese-built EV is a state-directed financing model of over 300 billion Canadian dollars worth of subsidies, tax breaks, cheap land, and suppressed wages. Distorted political incentives create far more firms than the domestic market can sustain and enable them to operate without profit for years, saturating the domestic market with chronic oversupply, unbalancing the economy, and generating epic trade surpluses. Many EV makers in this environment will fail eventually, but a few could become international giants, and their dominance will increase the PRC's geoeconomic leverage, control of key technologies, and power to set standards and shape global governance. The pattern is to flood, consolidate, and weaponize. In stage one, Chinese firms flood markets and undercut and outscale rivals. In stage two, profit margins collapse, competitors exit or never enter, and Chinese companies consolidate market share. In stage three, the Communist Party can use control of inputs, production, exports, and supply chains, and pricing power for geopolitical leverage. We've already seen variations of this playbook. Solar panels, where PRC oversupply drove the collapse of Western industry. Steel, where China has created global overcapacity. And rare earths, where the party state is wielding export controls in negotiations. In several other countries, EVs are already racing through stage 1 and capturing significant market share. As China's overproduction gains increasing access to the Canadian market, it risks sabotaging the government's new automotive strategy. A quota can limit import volumes, but it doesn't address the risk of connected vehicles running untrusted software or the entrenchment of imported Chinese brands that foster consumer loyalty and political pressure to expand the quota. Meanwhile, Canada will struggle to attract substantial investment, joint ventures, or technology transfer. Instead, Chinese automakers are likely to use complete knockdown, or CKD, car kit assembly to circumvent trade barriers and create structural dependency, while Canadian consumers bear the moral cost of complicity in harmful environmental practices and human rights violations such as forced labor. Canadians need to think strategically. The auto sector both sustains and depends on an advanced manufacturing ecosystem that in turn supports a defense industrial base and stable employment. If Chinese EVs achieve rapid growth in market share, it could trigger a rapid and irreversible collapse or capture of that ecosystem. In time, China's industrial gravity would pull Canada into stage 3, in which economic subordination and ritualized political deference compound to create strategic risk. The economy could slide back down the value chain until Canadians are relegated to being suppliers of raw materials dependent on a predatory great power for imports of the technologies that are shaping the future. I appreciate and share aspirations to accelerate the green transition, lower consumer prices, acquire technology, and hedge an unreliable Trump administration. But deeper economic entanglement with China is not a long-term route to achieving any of those goals. It is a dead end, because that trade is inseparable from expanding the attack surface for the CCP's coercive economic statecraft. To mitigate those risks and preserve options, the government should keep market access limited, conditional, and reversible with snapback provisions, conduct WTO-compliant anti-subsidy investigations to justify further countervailing measures, count any imports of CKD-assembled vehicles toward quotas, protect and develop domestic capacity in strategic sectors, including battery supply chains and critical minerals processing, align with reliable partners on trade measures, forced labor bans, investment screening criteria, cybersecurity regulations, and technology standards. Canada's automotive sector is at a fork in the road. If we take a wrong turn, an entire industrial ecosystem could be hollowed out or captured, leading to a dependency that erodes economic security, sovereignty, and democratic values. To avoid that, Canadians need to be resolute about setting terms and limiting the extent of trade with China in this strategic sector. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we will start our first round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. Mr. Korvik, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here and being before our committee. In January of this year, Canada's Prime Minister traveled to China to forge a new strategic partnership with the People's Republic of China focused on energy, agri-food, and trade. And during that visit, the Prime Minister said, "I believe the progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the new world order." So what's your reaction to those comments?
Deep concern at the potential implications of that statement. If it's simply short-term tactical temporizing, I think that's understandable in a complex situation, but I would not support that particular choice of words, because, in effect, the critical thing to understand about that kind of scenario is that Western countries, particularly democracies, may have policies and plans. The Chinese Communist Party has narratives, and the narrative it is trying to build is of inevitable preeminence and centrality in shaping both its region and ultimately world order. And contributing to that narrative is essentially making a concession in negotiations without receiving anything in return, and it's a very dangerous concession to make.
Thank you. Given your comments, you talk about tactical gamble and think strategically. So in your view, is it a mistake by this Liberal government to be moving Canada closer to China and the Chinese Communist Party at this time, considering their abhorrent track record and neglect for human rights, use of forced labor, and the unjust imprisonment not only of yourself, but others, including freedom and democracy advocate Jimmy Lai, who has family and hotel operations in not only my community of Niagara on the Lake, but throughout the province of Ontario?
Yes, I think it's tactically understandable in a situation of geopolitical uncertainty and extreme pressure. So I understand why the Canadian government is doing it, and in fact, many governments are trying to do that. I would distinguish between trying to stabilize relations with China and establish diplomatic mechanisms and channels to manage those relations in as orderly a means as possible, and to use face-to-face communication to deepen understanding of Chinese and Communist Party perspectives. I think that is necessary diplomacy. The risk is that stabilization slides into normalization and leads to deeper and deeper entanglement, which in turn magnifies and increases the risks of the many things that the Hogue Inquiry and many other Canadian reports and analyses, for example, from our security agencies, have already made clear. The fundamental problem is that the Chinese Communist Party has an agenda that is hostile to Western democracies because it seeks to weaken our governance and our societies and divide us from each other. And it is particularly interested in driving wedges between the United States and its allies. And currently, it's capitalizing on the obviously fraught relations. But we shouldn't be leaning into that dynamic. We should be looking for ways to strategically resist it. Hedging uncertainty with the United States by tilting toward China is a risky bet that is likely to carry more negative costs for Canada than the positive benefits that it could potentially bring. It magnifies risks rather than reducing them. Instead, Canada should be diversifying to other economies more.
Thank you. And during the last federal election, the Prime Minister indicated that China was Canada's biggest security threats. I mean, in fact, just a week after that, he was at a news conference in Niagara Falls in my community and said Canada has to counter Chinese foreign interference threats. He also criticized China for being a partner with Russia in the war with Ukraine and said it is a threat to broader Asia and Taiwan in particular. Carney said China is the biggest threat from a geopolitical sense. We're taking action to address this. So do you know what he means when he says, Canada, we're taking action to address this? And what has changed?
I think that's a question to direct the government in terms of what policies they're pursuing. My impression is, for example, and this is where you see different simultaneous activities, right? On the one hand, deeper economic entanglement in some areas. I think the measures would include being judicious about which sectors that trade and investment is allowed to increase. And secondly, it's increased spending and investment in defense procurement, and strengthening things. But the problem from a scientific and technological perspective for this committee is that more entanglement with China creates more risks, which in turn imposes costs on the government and the taxpayer to mitigate. And it's questionable whether the economic benefits, which are likely to be narrowly concentrated in a few firms and, frankly, a few individuals, are not outweighed by the costs of having to mitigate all those challenges, and in particular by the risk of interfering with negotiations with the United States, which is still a vastly more significant relationship. And the Americans have made quite clear that they take a dim view of deeper entanglement with China by Canada and its allies. I think we need to take a longer view and keep calm and be more strategic in terms of the likely implications of that balance of power, and not make moves that would jeopardize relations and negotiations with the United States for the sake of short-term economic benefits that are likely to prove ephemeral.
Thank you. Madam Chair. 8 seconds. Oh, thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you, MP Baldinelli, and then we will go to MP Noor Mohammed for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here. Perhaps I might begin with you, Ambassador. One of the things that I think is sort of an important framing for all of us is that, the Prime Minister described this moment in China-Canada relations as a turning point. From your experience as the ambassador in Beijing, how significant is this reset? What doors does it open that have been closed? And what are the safeguards that you see that are now in place and sort of the guardrails that are in place that helps to make sure that this relationship is one that respects the way that Canada works to see the world right now?
Well, I would say that the visit of Mr. Carney was a very important one. And I can understand that he is driven by a sense of urgency. He knows that the relationship with the United States could further deteriorate. One thing that I would like to clarify, because many people question this idea that we have entered into a strategic partnership with China. In fact, we are just resuming a strategic partnership. The strategic partnership was established when Mr. Harper was Prime Minister, and therefore we are just going back to where we were. Furthermore, I would add that you have to engage with China. We know how close they are to Russia, to Iran, to North Korea, and we have to use all opportunities to impress on them that they have, for instance, to speak with President Putin to agree on a ceasefire in Ukraine. Also, I think that the good news is that Mr. Carney is perceived by the Chinese leaders as a technocrat, a serious and competent leader. He is a technocrat, as they are technocrats. They grew up managing villages, then provinces, then ministries back in Beijing, and I think he has the capacity to raise difficult issues with them. I think he has chosen to raise cases like human rights, forced labor in Xinjiang, the case of Jimmy Lai. I think he raised that in private. He doesn't want to antagonize the Chinese leadership by speaking publicly, but I think he has the capacity to speak the truth to the Chinese leader. And what they know is they accept someone who is firm, and I think that Mr. Carney can be firm with them. Already, China is a much more important trade partner to us than most people believe. If you listen to Statistic Canada, our exports went up last year by 13% to reach some 34 billion. In fact, if you look at the Chinese figures, it's closer to 60 billion. And why is that? Well, the Bank of China has been buying Canadian gold in the last few years, but they have been buying this gold on the London market or the Zurich market. And so we have a challenge to capture the exports that go through third markets. So I think there's still very good potential to increase our exports, but at the same time, we have to do more domestically to counter Chinese interference and spying operations.
So, Ambassador, if I could just turn a little bit to now the issue of the EV sector. One of the things that I think we've come to accept is that thanks to the way in which the U.S. has taken decisions, it's had a massive impact on our auto sector and the auto industry in this country. Auto production, as my friends from Ontario would know, has gone from 3 million vehicles in 2000 to shy of 1.3 million in 2025. What are the ways in which attracting Chinese EV joint ventures, including you hearing some of the comments out of Magna and others, how is that going to help potentially employment in this country, manufacturing in this country, and how does it help to bolster our manufacturing sector at a time when reliability of the United States as a partner is diminished and may or may not return to the levels that it used to be?
Well, you're right. We have to take Donald Trump to his word when he says that he doesn't want to buy Canadian cars, and we know all the pressure that he is putting on U.S. car manufacturers operating in Canada. In fact, we are at the stage where we should organize a boycott of companies like Stellantis that have moved back the production to the U.S. Just to make clear that the auto pack was very successful. And as I said in my opening remarks, we set the rules here. We should welcome Chinese car manufacturers, but set the rules. And similarly to what GM Canada had to do when it went to Shanghai in 2009, we should say you are welcome to come to Canada, but you will have, after 3 years, to have about 30% of Canadian content, and after 10 years, it has to be 100% content. This would help to maintain jobs in Ontario and other provinces with regard to car parts manufacturers and, of course, auto workers.
And if we were to take a step further and say, we know that Canada has the resources that are needed to compete in the EV market. We've got ample access to zero-emission electricity. We've got access to critical minerals. How do we turn those natural advantages into negotiating assets with the Chinese automakers when it comes time to looking at building in Canada?
Well, I think the government should look at the whole supply chain. I think when I said that we have to clarify rules that apply to Chinese investment in Canada, of course we know that China has become a big investor abroad. They have invested, Chinese companies have invested over 100 billion already. This was mostly in the oil and gas sector, but I think now they want to expand, and I think the future for us.
Interrupting. Time is up for MP Muhammad. If you can wind up in a few seconds.
So we have to move to green technologies, and we could welcome Chinese investment in critical minerals and rare earths, provided 70 or 80% stay in North America.
So, thank you. And now we will proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. And Mr. Saint-Jacques, and on April 17th, the Prime Minister said that the greatest threat to Canada is China, but we're trading with China. We're doing business with China now. Is that threat diminished, or has it disappeared? Well, it hasn't really evaporated. We learned a lot during the Hague Commission about Chinese activities in terms of interference in the political arena, in Chinese communities where, unfortunately, Chinese Canadians were victims. There has to be a register of foreign agents in Canada, and there has to be more done to counter interference within Canada by this nation. There has to be true inquiries by the RCMP and others with respect to a situation like that. China is conducting an operation that is very complex, and it is coordinated by the Foreign Department. I have heard from the Jamestown Foundation that says in 2003 there were hundreds and hundreds of Chinese organizations that fell under the influence of this Chinese department and got money from it. So they do much to undermine our democracy. So, yes, we do have to engage with China on the one hand, but we have to protect our intellectual property. But on the other hand, we have to do a lot more. And I think that in his discussions with the Chinese, the Prime Minister said that this interference activity and disinformation activity would constitute a red line for him in Canada. It has to be brought to zero. Yes, but I'm thinking about the speech that he made. Look, he said it was the biggest threat facing Canada, but we're trading with them. We're doing business with them. Here's my question. Are there electric vehicles that would make us more dependent on China? Or should we not be strengthening our technological abilities, our independence? China is a totalitarian nation threatening our nation, and that's on the one hand. And then on the other hand, here we are trading with them. In terms of moral democracy, what do we have here? I don't agree with you, really. We do have to have some relation. We know what has to be done. And rules have to be put in place so that this trade has to be carried out respecting our rules, our laws. Japanese came to Canada because they had technology that was more advanced than North American technology at a certain point. And so now we have the Americans getting disinterested in the whole sector. We have an environmental problems that are increasing. China has made progress. Of course, there are negative factors everywhere, but they've advanced. And we have to look at that, but ensure that there is economic spin-off here in Canada that will help us everywhere in Canada, and I hope in Quebec. Well, I hope you're not comparing Japan and China. We could talk about Europe, which is much more, to my mind, much more trustworthy. How can it be that there's an on the one hand, China is a threat, an obstacle, and then we're bringing in their cars? I'd like to hear you about that, about our strategic position. These are contradictory messages. Some things are being said in private, other things are being said in public. I think in terms of the electric vehicles, the EVs, the Chinese ones are better quality and better priced than the European ones or the Japanese ones. If you sell Chinese cars, there was, and as I said earlier, there was an increase of 70% over the beginning of the year. They're being sold in the UK, but they have put tariffs in place. Spain has Chinese manufacturers coming in. So there has been some laziness on the part of American and European EV manufacturers. I can tell you that similar cars cost more than they do if you were to take the Chinese model. So you want to be able to advantage Canada in this whole matter. Yes, but are you putting profit before safety and security? No, that's not it at all. We are the ones that establish the rules here. That said, the federal government should work on issues like forced labor, the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. All of this, these are sectors that have to be clarified. Mr. Champagne said that he discussed this when he was there a few weeks ago. So there is work that has to be done by the federal government to ensure our safety and security without endangering us.
Now we will start our second round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Mahal for 5 minutes. MP Mahal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses for sparing their time for this testimony today. I would start with Mr. Korek. That's how you pronounce it. So my question is, some liberal voices, including Michael Ma, have downplayed credible reports of forced labor in Chinese supply chain. Based on what we know, is it responsible for elected officials to minimize those human rights concerns?
No, it is not.
So when Liberal MPs downplay forced labor concerns, are they weakening Canada's ability to scrutinize these supply chains properly?
I think a critical problem with minimizing documented human rights abuses across China that are extensive and deeply annotated, it sends a signal to the Chinese Communist Party that such activities will be tolerated and are permissible, and indeed, in effect, if Canada then engage, or Canadian companies or Canadian consumers engage in supply chains, buying products from China that are made with forced labor, we are in effect becoming directly complicit in the continuance of those practices. It's not legal in Canada, so why should we tolerate it in our supply chains? It also, incidentally, it is of course a critical factor for Canadian values and democracy and what holds this country together. But it is also a direct economic implication, because that kind of low rights economy, both through forced labor and poor labor conditions and generally bad labor rights, as well as environmental violations, in effect becomes a price advantage for Chinese producers. The forced labor is much cheaper than competing labor in Canada. So it has direct implications for Canadian workers and for the competitiveness of Canadian firms. Now, of course, it's not the only reason why Chinese producers are so cheap, but it is an important factor, and it is one that we should not accept, and we need to factor into our customs and border regulations and our legislation those risks and mitigate them, because it's a responsibility of the government to assure the Canadian consumer that goods that they buy are not supporting human rights violations.
And given the impression or position that we have globally, that we are the country where human rights are protected, where we are the flag bearers of when it comes to human rights, when it comes to giving labor their deserving wages and their rights. I think your answer definitely sends chills to the spine. And to that, I think to that nerve, Canada banned Huawei over data and national security risk back in the day. Given your warnings that EVs are effectively two-tone cell phones, how can the Liberal government allow justifying Chinese EVs with similar or greater collection capabilities when it comes to data?
I think that's a very significant risk that needs to be properly assessed and regulated by Transport Canada with the support of the relevant security agencies in Canada. Look, all electric vehicles, and in fact all modern cars now have that capacity for gathering information and data. The issue is whether we can assure how that data is handled, where it is held, and who is able to access it, and how access to it can be used. The same goes for the capacity to potentially remotely control electric vehicles, because let's be realistic, within a decade it's likely many of these vehicles will also be operating autonomously. And there is already evidence that, for example, some vehicles from some manufacturers can be remote controlled and used in hazardous ways. So it's a multivariate threat, potentially. And the crux of the matter is whether or not you are able to trust the government that regulates the countries that are providing those vehicles. It is not possible to have that trust with the People's Republic of China's government. And so if you're going to admit vehicles of that sort into the Canadian economy, and let Canadian consumers drive them around, you are going to have careful regulation of them, and most likely you're going to have to require that any software that they are running is not Chinese software, but rather is software either from trusted domestic Canadian providers or from other trusted providers. So that so there may be technical means of mitigating that, and I think that may be what the government has in mind. But the question I always come back to, or the two questions I come back to, is it once you factor in the cost of doing that, does it still make economic sense? Do you still have a price advantage? Because if the whole point is to drive technological development in Canada and provide consumers with lower cost products, if those benefits are offset by the costs of all these security measures, what's the point?
Thank you. With that, your time is up, MP Mahal, and we will now go to MP Rana for 5 minutes. MP Rana.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all the witnesses for your time. Mr. Santiagues, Canada's trade relationship with China has undergone significant changes over the past few years. How do you see this arrangement fitting into the broader trajectory of that relationship, and what opportunity does it open up that were not there before?
Well, there is a growing middle class in China. We know that these people like to buy Canadian seafood, Canadian lobsters. They like also to buy health products. They want to buy good consumer goods. Companies like Lululemon are making good business in China. I think in many areas it's possible to benefit from trade opportunities. Of course, we have to protect our intellectual property. We have to protect our technology. We have been, unfortunately, naive and complacent in back years, and we have lost a lot. The demise of Nortel is something that is very sad, and of course, Huawei has benefited from that. But we know that China has made a switch. They are moving to make all their economy as electric as possible. They want to reduce their dependency on foreign suppliers of oil, of natural gas, and they want to reduce their use of coal. They are years ahead of us. And so I think we can benefit from some of the advances they have made, including in solar energy. But on the other hand, there are also products that we have that we can sell to them. And I would say that, when you look at all the G7 countries, they all want to strike good deals with China. President Trump will be there in a month. Guess what? He will want also to increase the sale of American products. In fact, that could affect us because there are many products, especially in the agri-food sector, where we compete with the U.S. He will want to attract Chinese EV manufacturers to come to the United States. But again, it's for us to manage this trade in an intelligent, systematic way and explain to the Chinese that they have to abide by international rules. We have to work with partners to make sure that they will respect these rules. And I think that China has developed a level of development where they can now start to respect those rules a lot more. They need an international system that works to achieve their objectives. And they know that what President Trump is doing right now threatens this. Xi Jinping has talk of chaos and going back to the law of the jungle. And so I think by working with our partners, and I don't include, unfortunately, the Americans in that, we can force China to behave more properly.
And also one thing, China opened their market for our farmers as well to import our canola oil as well. Thank you.
Well,
go ahead.
Chinese consumers really like canola oil, and the canola seed also is used in the agricultural sector in China. I think there are good possibilities there. We were the first country to sell wheat to China under the Diefenbaker government against the wishes of President Kennedy in the U.S. I think there are other areas where we can export more of our products. I think the government should work on removing tariffs on pork from Quebec. Again, because there's a growing middle class, I think we could export more seafood, more good quality Canadian agri-food.
Thank you. China is undergoing shifts in how it thinks about the domestic EV sector. How should Canada be reading those changes, and does it affect how attractive the joint venture opportunities under these arrangements actually are?
Well, I said earlier that we have to look at the rules on Chinese investment in Canada. I think we are at the stage where we would benefit from attracting Chinese manufacturers to Canada. But we have to set the rules. We have to force them to increase gradually the Canadian content in their cars. So, for instance, after 10 years, they would have to have 100% Canadian content. This would ensure employment in Canada.
Thank you. Time is up. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Mr. Saint-Jacques.
Mr. Saint-Jacques, you spoke about the special committee on Canada-China relations. It said that no Chinese could refuse a request from the Chinese government. So this represents this represents a sophisticated, active cyber threat against Canada, not in terms particularly of the theft of intellectual property. So there is this a double threat then, not just trade, but intellectual property and technology. We are the ones who establish the rules, but we have to apply them. I can say that when Huawei started to export its products to Canada, there was an arrangement with the CSE that tested each and every one of these products before it was released, so that the Chinese government would not be able to use them to monitor conversations. There are means to do this type of thing, to prevent this type of use of data by them. They are rather elaborate means, but I have to be clear, there is no intrusion of this type that will be tolerated. That has to be clear. So Chinese disinformation and interference in Canada cannot be. Do you really believe, sir, that the government of Canada is going to give guarantees against the Chinese government with respect to the data gathered by electric vehicles? China's success is due in part to the theft of technology. It was shameless everywhere, but we are quite capable of preventing that with our rules. As Mr. Kovac said, if we can impose conditions in that data centers where the cars will be assembled in Canada, will have that information. I had benefited from a discount, say, for insurance because I'm a good driver, but no agreement there. I don't agree, sir.
Time is up for MP Blanchet-Jonca. Now we will go to MP Ho for 5 minutes. MP Ho, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kovac, during the election last year, the Prime Minister said Canada's biggest security threat was, quote, China. Then after he was elected, he went to Beijing and announced a new strategic partnership. So in your view, did Beijing change that quickly, or did the Prime Minister change?
I think Beijing didn't change at all. In fact, all of the evidence indicates that China is continuing on the same trajectory that it has been on at least since Xi Jinping became General Secretary in 2012. And that is a trend toward deeper and deeper totalitarian governance, turning China into a police state, more egregious violations of human rights, and more aggressive international behavior. Just one example, for example, although China is perhaps not currently putting coercive pressure on Canada, although as Ambassador Saint-Jacques noted, there are still barriers to pork and other products, it is aggressively bullying Japan, for example, and continues to put pressure on other neighbors, such as the Philippines. So no, it has not changed.
So how should Canadians understand that leap from the Prime Minister calling Beijing the top security threat to now calling it a strategic partner? Is that a coherent doctrine on the part of the Prime Minister, or is it just a political rationalization that the deal was going to get done anyway with this Liberal government?
I think there are certain realities that China's economy is sufficiently large and systemic that trade with it of some form is going to take place. The question is on what terms and with what safeguards and protections and in what sectors. And I think that's really where this committee needs to be offering guidance and support to the government and greater understanding for Canadian citizens, because you cannot have unfettered free trade with China. You need to have tight restrictions.
So at Davos, the Prime Minister said major powers now use, quote, economic integration as coercion, end quote. Do you think the Prime Minister is referring to Beijing?
I don't know what was in his head, but I would imagine that he was focusing particularly on the United States because it's a bit of a phenomenon of focusing on the crocodile closest to the canoe. But it's imperative that Canada not forget that China has not become any less of a risk, and that all of our policies with China keep that in mind. The world is bifurcating into two technology stacks, realistically. One is centered on Beijing, and one is centered on the United States and other Western governments that partner with it. It's not going to be feasible to be part of both of them eventually. And so decisions that Canada makes now about technology and industry are going to have long-term ramifications for that. We should absolutely be working with other like-minded partners and diversifying, but we need to be thinking really strategically about what kind of limited association we continue to have with China, how we mitigate risks from that, and how we manage that in the context of our relationship with the United States.
So in Davos, the Prime Minister said, quote, "When we only negotiate bilaterally with the hegemon, we negotiate from weakness. We accept what is offered," end quote. Do you think the Prime Minister simply accepted what he was offered on trade with Beijing, or do you think he should be standing up more for our values and our sovereignty?
I think he made a short-term political calculation to remove, a short-term problem of pressure on a vulnerable sector in Canada, particularly canola. And I can understand the imperative to do that, but one needs to then have reversibility and snapback provisions, because the problem is that deal trades several months of restored trade in that sector for what is potentially a permanently embedded relationship. Once you have dealer networks, once you have consumer brand loyalty, if you start to have investment and so on, and that becomes hard to reverse. And you need to factor into that Canadian values and protections of human rights. These are not tradable items. You cannot simply choose between trade and human rights, because ultimately the human rights situation in China is embedded in the trading relationship.
So, last question. During his visit to Beijing, the Prime Minister signed a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, on cooperation in combating crimes between the RCMP and the Ministry of Public Security of the People's Republic of China. Do you see an issue with that?
Yes, I do see an issue with that, because that organization is complicit in massive human rights violations, including against Canadians. You need to have some kind of dialogue with it, but you need to be very careful that it doesn't have any influence or that it doesn't serve as a backdoor to compromise Canadian safety.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Noor Mohammed for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Carver, good to see you again. And just to pick up where my colleague left off, you've been remarkably clear that despite what you personally endured, that countries need to find ways to move forward and to figure out where their relationships need to go. Given that framing, what would a well-designed reset with China look like in the context of where we are today, in the context of the reality that Canada is facing with the United States, where increasingly we are seeing that cleave continues to grow, not to come closer? And is there a version of China-Canada engagement on EVs that you would see as being, that you would be able to support, I suppose?
I think, first of all, going back to your colleague's point about Prime Minister Carney's statement at Davos, what Canada should be doing is doubling down on alliances and deepening relations and coalitions with like-minded countries, partners, and allies, so that rather than trying to negotiate exactly that relationship you're talking about one-on-one with China, in a context where the Chinese Communist Party is going to have most of the leverage and the strength and the coercive power, Canada needs to be focusing on building coalitions of like-minded countries with similar and aligned trade barriers, cybersecurity standards, human rights and labor standards, and so on, and then presenting the Chinese Communist Party with a unified alignment of countries that have the same standards and will not backfill for each other, and that will help protect each other. And through that sort of mechanism, ideally aligned as much as possible with the United States, then you can have a stronger negotiating posture with China. And what you should be looking for is policies that deliver certain benefits in sectors with Canada where it is still safe to have trade and investment, and they're going to be strictly limited, while not taking actions that in any way deliver benefits to a regime that is ultimately seeking dominance and centrality in the world in ways that are harmful to Canada.
So if you were to dig into that and you were to look at these sectors where there is opportunity, I think we've discussed some of those, agriculture, there's an opportunity around EVs, critical minerals, so on and so forth. In the context of the safeguards around Chinese EVs, effectively, Canada has gone to where Europe has gone in terms of the safeguards, in terms of the issues related to data protection. Would that not then align with exactly what you said in respect of working with like-minded countries to ensure that when we are trading, even though conversations may be bilateral, that the context is multilateral, and the context is then predicated on what others with like-minded values and like-minded sort of circumstances have actually either done or are doing?
I think there is some scope for implicit or, if not directly coordinated, but effectively aligned policymaking, and we need to see more of that. So it doesn't always necessarily need to be an obvious trade block, but rather aligned policies and consistent so that there are not backdoors to circumvent trade barriers that all of these economies agree are necessary. But I want to be clear that I don't think that Chinese electric vehicles can solve the problems that Canada and this committee are looking to solve, because ultimately automakers that are in that sector are not competing simply with a rival corporation. They're competing with an entire industrial ecosystem that is designed to drive them out of business. And so that will deter other automakers from, let's say, Japan or Korea or other more trustworthy countries to enter the Canadian market and help us build that ecosystem. It's actually going to have, I think, a negative effect that hollows out the industrial base and weakens us. So we need to protect against that and instead align with countries that are more like-minded, both in values but also in economic policy and a commitment to free market principles.
So on that basis, though, going back to EVs, because I mean that is the topic of this study, and we could have a much longer conversation about geopolitics and the other challenges that we face. But if we come back to this question of EVs and we talk about like-minded countries, look, I don't think there's anybody in this room from any side that isn't clear about the desire of certain Chinese auto manufacturers and others in that ecosystem to ensure that they have global dominance. I mean, this has been what we have seen what the Americans tried to do with their auto sector in years past, so on and so forth. When we look at Europe right now, and having spent time in Europe, I was shocked to see the number of BYDs
30 seconds
on
left.
the road, and the excitement with which people in those countries are using their Chinese EVs. How has Europe managed this issue in terms of their own manufacturing and their own auto sectors? Because they seem to have found a balance, or they seem to be appearing to have found a balance.
I don't think they've found a balance at all, I'm afraid. I think they are in long-term structural industrial decline. So how has Europe managed this? Badly and inadequately so far. Their duties and their quotas are not going to be strong enough, and their industrial bases are going to be hollowed out. And if you look at the economic malaise that has gripped Germany, there's empirical examples of it. 10,000 manufacturing jobs lost a month over the last year. It is going to be devastating to Europe, and they need a new strategy.
Thank you. Time is up. And before we end this panel, we will have 2 minutes with the MPD Ritter and 2 minutes with MP Rana, and then this panel will end and we will have the second one. So MPD Ritter, you will have 2 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kovrig, a lot of members of my community have reached out to my office because they're worried about their jobs. They're a part of the larger ecosystem with the auto manufacturing and what's happening with the decline in our auto industry right now. And so I'm speaking on behalf of them when I'm asking you, when we're opening the door to tens of thousands of Chinese Communist Party linked EVs, while our sector is already under pressure, does this risk weakening our local manufacturing ecosystems over time?
Very much so. I think Canada needs realistically a plan A and a plan B, one in which we are doing everything we can to preserve a North American automotive ecosystem to the extent that we can persuade the U.S. government to enable that. And then a plan B, if that fails, if that doesn't work, what is Canada's alternative, and how much of an industry can we preserve by looking to work with other partners? But I don't think that Chinese electric vehicle companies are a solution in either of those cases.
Thank you. And Mr. Saint-Jacques, I'm going to challenge you on a statement you made of allowing Chinese investment into our natural resources. My question is wouldn't those then be Chinese-owned companies or Chinese Communist Party-owned companies that would be unearthing our minerals, and then therefore they'd be owning the intellectual property to unearth our minerals and then have the ability then to charge us at retail for our own assets in the future?
Good question, but it's for the Canadian government and for provinces to set the regulations and to apply them. The reality is that we don't have enough capital to develop all the mining projects that are required. Furthermore, the Chinese companies, and they are not all state-owned, there are many private companies that have developed the technology to extract rare earth and critical mineral. But again, if we were to tell them you have to
Just clearly, though, would they not own the intellectual property to unearth the minerals?
I think we set the rules and we could manage that.
Thank you. Time is up, and we will now end this panel with 2 minutes with MP Rana.
Ties while also growing Canada's domestic EV sector. In your assessment, what does Canada need to get right to make that work?
I think, first of all, Canada needs to keep that arrangement as constrained as possible and treat it as an experiment that needs to really be ring-fenced from the rest of the economy and industry and see how it goes and make sure that it is reversible if it begins to have obvious negative effects, which, frankly, I think it's likely to. I don't think that strategy has the potential to drive investment or much technological innovation in the sector because it will actually deter other companies from other countries from entering. And most likely what we're going to see with Chinese EV companies is them setting up knockdown kits where all they're really doing is circumventing trade barriers. Unless you have an integrated North American market, I doubt very much they're going to be seriously interested in building proper, full plants that would actually sustain a technological ecosystem and help us build that whole supply chain locally. The Chinese government is on record as wanting to restrict its EV companies from transferring technology and process knowledge. And if you look at the limited examples from Europe, for example, or others, it's usually knockdown kit plants, or they are importing their own workers and they're not transferring any technology. So I don't see how Canada is going to have the leverage to do that. The only scenario where that might be possible is if you have an integrated North American market under CUSMA in which US, Canada, and Mexico all impose the same standards and then are able to use that massive leverage to potentially oblige Chinese companies to come in and actually contribute in a way that is positive but carefully restricted and managed. Alone, I don't see how Canada can do that.
Thank you. Time is up. With that, this panel comes to an end, and I want to thank both our witnesses for appearing before the committee and providing your important testimony. And we will suspend the meeting for a few minutes so that the witnesses for the second panel can take in. Thank you once again, and the meeting is suspended. Welcome back. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on the Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments should be addressed to the chair. And with that, I would like to welcome our witnesses for this panel. We are joined by video conference by Madame Joanna Cariasis, Director Policy and Strategy from Clean Energy Canada. And we are joined in person from the Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada. We are joined by the Privy Commissioner of Canada, Mr. Philip Dufresne, and we are also joined by Director Policy Research and Parliamentary Affairs Directorate, Lara Eves. Both the witnesses will have 5 minutes for the opening remarks, and then we will go to our round of questioning. And I would request Madame Cariasis to please go ahead. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Clean Energy Canada is a national think tank at Simon Fraser University focused on advancing the country's energy transition. The global auto sector is undergoing a rapid transformation. Driven by China's EV dominance, EVs are expected to make up 30% of new car sales worldwide this year and 40% by 2030. At the same time, the U.S., under President Trump, has destabilized the historically integrated North American auto market. In this new reality, Clean Energy Canada has consistently called for a nuanced approach to Chinese EVs that balances consumer affordability with industrial competitiveness. In our view, the recent Canada-Chinese EV deal strikes that balance. As gas prices rise above $2 per litre in many parts of Canada, Canadians are rediscovering their interest in EVs as a way to save money on fuel. A typical Canadian driver can save between $23,000 and $32,000 over 10 years of ownership by choosing an EV over a comparable gas vehicle, according to new analysis released by my organization last week. However, in 2025, Canada was one of the only markets in the world to see EV sales decline. A number of policy choices, imposing an 100% tariff on Chinese EVs in late 2024, but also pausing rebates and the EV availability standard, caused Canada to fall out of step with the global trend towards EVs. 2026 is set to be a comeback year for Canada. The return of the $5,000 federal EV rebate, combined with higher war-driven gas prices, has improved the cost calculus for EVs by a further $12,000 almost overnight. In short, Canadians are keen on EVs, but they're looking for models within their budget. The Canada-Chinese deal is one part of the broader package of policies that can help Canadians access affordable EVs. By allowing in a limited quota of EVs at a lower tariff rate focused on more affordable models, Canada is directly creating an affordable EV segment we've been missing. It will also have indirect benefits as a result of increased competition. In the EU, for instance, where lower tariffs are applied to Chinese EVs, consumers now have access to over 20 EV models under the price point of $40,000 Canadian. Half of those are offered by domestic EU carmaker brands, and only 7 are offered by Chinese automakers. The EU is now the fastest growing EV market in the world, with nearly 30% of new car sales last year being electric. What's more, Canadians are enthusiastic about this change. According to our 2026 poll, among the 50% of Canadians who are open to buying an EV, 70% presented some level of interest in getting a Chinese one. The Canada-China agreement also presents opportunities to ensure Canada's auto sector can remain competitive in this changing world. A strategy of relying on outdated partnerships with the U.S., where Trump is undertaking an assault on his own auto sector, pulling the rug out from under their EV plans, raising manufacturing costs with tariffs, and now driving up gas prices, all while pushing consumers worldwide towards the EVs that he does not want to be making. This will not set Canada up for success. Canada needs to hedge, and this means placing bets on new partners who are positioning themselves strategically in the present versus looking at what we did in the past. A two-pronged approach of selective exposure to Chinese EVs plus preferential market access for domestic producers is a better path. Together, these measures could help Canada enhance its industrial competitiveness by incentivizing Chinese, Korean, and German firms to build here, employing Canadian workers, using upstream Canadian inputs like critical minerals, and engaging in technology and skills transfer to help Canadian companies catch up to their lead. We also have massive economic opportunities producing the critical minerals, battery materials, and other components that go into EVs, all which go hand in hand with higher EV uptake. This is not about being pro-China. It's clear that this will be a delicate and sometimes difficult relationship to manage with risks and opportunities that must be carefully weighed, as we heard from the earlier witnesses today. But this is about being pro-Canada, realizing that setting Canada up to compete in the auto market of the future no longer means betting it all on America. Yeah. Survival will necessarily mean building something new. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. With that, we will go to Mr. Dufresne for 5 minutes. Please go ahead. You can do your opening remarks for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for this invitation to appear on your study on the implications of Canada-China preliminary joint arrangement on Canada's electric vehicle sector. As Privacy Commissioner of Canada, my mission is to protect and promote Canadians' right to privacy. My mandate is to oversee compliance with Canada's federal public and private sector privacy laws, which set the ground rules for how federal government, institutions, and businesses handle their personal information.
That Canadians now drive are connected to the internet. This can offer significant convenience, such as real-time navigation, facilitated roadside assistance, and seamless integration with mobile devices. These connected features also raise important privacy considerations. Modern vehicles collect and transmit large volumes of personal data, including location history, driving behavior, and personal preferences, which also raises the issue of how this information is stored, shared, and protected. In some cases, the data may potentially be transferred or stored in foreign jurisdictions where different legal frameworks and data protection standards can increase the risk of access or use of personal information, including access by foreign courts, law enforcement, and national security authorities. Data flows underpinning the connected vehicle ecosystem can be complex and opaque. This is why my office has supported research into connected vehicles through our contribution program. This year, my office has funded 2 related research projects, one that is evaluating the privacy permissions and releases that automakers are requiring of their Canadian customers in return for access to onboard features and connected applications in new cars, and another examining how privacy by design can be used to improve privacy protection when companies access identifiable information from connected vehicles. I anticipate that the result of this work will be published in the next few months. La loi fédérale sur la protection des
Canada's federal private sector privacy law, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA, does not contain a separate and explicit rules governing trans-border data flows. PIPEDA currently requires organizations be transparent about their data practices, which can include when personal information is transferred to a foreign jurisdiction and is accessible by their government, law enforcement, or courts. The legislation also clarifies that organizations remain responsible for personal information that is transferable to a third party for processing and must ensure, through contractual or other means, that a comparable level of protection is provided.
Specifically address trans-border data flows to ensure that Canadians' personal information is appropriately protected prior to leaving the country. This could include requiring privacy impact assessments before data moves beyond Canada's borders and providing for specific tools to ensure that data is afforded a comparable level of protection when it travels outside the country. This could be accomplished through, for example, standard contractual clauses, codes of practice, and certification programs. My office also works closely with our international counterparts to help advance trusted, safe, and secure cross-border flows of personal information. This is one of my priorities as the newly elected chair of the Global Privacy Assembly, and it is also a pillar of my work with my counterparts in the G7 Data Protection and Privacy Authorities Roundtable. Last December, the Roundtable released a position paper on developing a strategic approach to the concept of data-free flow with trust, and I look forward to continuing this important work under the French G7 presidency this year. My office also supports the exploration of data transfer mechanisms that can provide businesses with regulatory certainty and that Canadians can trust, such as the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules, CBPR, Forum certification. La protection de la vie privée est
Privacy is and must remain a priority as we explore the implications of technology to ensure that appropriate safeguards are in place to enable responsible innovation and to protect Canadians' personal information. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and we will start our first round of questioning, and we will begin with MPD Ritter for 6 minutes. MPD Ritter, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Mrs. Krianzis, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you for being here today. I'm just going to talk about the comments on a more competitive option. So forced labor is a part of the problem of why this is a more competitive option. Every aspect through the supply chain, through credible resources, is a contributing to factor as why these EVs by the Chinese Communist Party are more competitive here in Canada. Not only that, but they're also being highly subsidized by the Chinese Communist Party state in order to make them more economic. So my question is how can you state that this is a pro-Canada choice to bring them into Canada when we're going against our own Canadian values to bring them here?
Thanks so much for your question. So part of why Chinese EVs are so much lower cost is China's had a 2-decade head start on legacy car makers in transitioning to electric vehicles. Hundreds of Chinese EV companies started in the ecosystem and have been engaged in a very competitive price war to get down to the lowest cost technologies. They have also been able to build out an entire battery supply chain in China that those companies have access to, and so are now able to produce batteries for under $100 per kilowatt hour, which is a very important tipping point.
Can you state with certainty that part of that competitiveness is not using forced labor? Can you state with certainty that that is not an aspect of what's going on here?
So I want to be clear, Clean Energy Canada unequivocally opposes any forms of forced labor. Canada has a legal framework in place. Canada's fighting against forced labor and Child Labor and Supply Chains Act. Plus, we have measures under CUSMA that are specifically meant to address these issues.
But how can we fight against it if we're allowing these vehicles to come into Canada because it's an economic option when that's a part of the economic option? How are we fighting against that then?
So I'm not a labor or human rights expert, but my understanding is that those legal frameworks would not allow products that have been made with forced labor to come into Canada, and we should be implementing and enforcing those requirements diligently, as well as strengthening them if necessary. But I also want to make clear, this is not an EV-specific issue. And so our efforts to combat forced labor should apply to all goods coming into Canada from China and beyond, whether it's electric vehicles or whether it's iPhones, clothing, gas-powered vehicles. And I think Canada should be taking a consistent approach.
Do you think that not a good first step would be with this EV agreement that we have to ensure that there's no forced labor as a part of this EV agreement? Do you not think that that would be a good step to start?
Absolutely. And if that's not already integrated through our laws that are in place, then we can restate it as part of the agreement. But
so
forced labor should not be a part of it.
Would you then go against allowing them into Canada if it was found? Would you state as part of Clean Energy Canada that it's not a good idea to bring them into Canada if it was a part of a forced labor problem in China?
Clean Energy Canada doesn't want goods coming in that have been used with forced labor. Banning all Chinese-made EVs from all companies coming from any part of China is not a targeted approach that specifically addresses forced labor issues. I think that we need a more targeted approach to address the issues that we're concerned with without depriving Canadians of the low-cost EVs that are available in almost all other parts of the world.
Thank you. Commissioner, I just want to ask you a quick question before I'm out of time. The United States is currently restricting CCP-linked EV technology over national security and data concerns. Do you think a potential consequence of that could be if a Canadian owns a CCP vehicle that they might not be able to drive across the border?
I would hesitate to comment on how the U.S. would interpret their practices in terms of crossing borders. But what I can say is data crosses borders all the time. And so that's why I'm flagging the importance of making sure that Canadian privacy law takes that into consideration. It does to some extent, as I've highlighted in my statement, that organizations have to ensure comparable treatment, but it's through contracts or other means. The problem with contracts or other means is it's not going to bind governments of other countries, and which is why one of my key recommendations for privacy law reform in Canada is that we should put in place trans-border transfer rules that would require a more stringent consideration in these cases.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, Commissioner. Have you received any assurances by the Government of Canada that there are safeguards in place to protect Canadian data from being collected and transmitted back to the CCP?
We have not engaged with the Government of Canada on this specific issue, but I have engaged with the department in terms of my priority recommendations. And there are lots of discussions in terms of cross-border data flows. There's lots of work happening in the privacy community, but also with governments, with the OECD, on pushing the importance of rule of law, necessity and proportionality. So I'm continuing to advocate for those.
So you as the, I just want to reiterate, so you as the Privacy Commissioner of Canada has not been consulted in regards?
On this framework, no, I have not.
Thank you. Do you think the Government of Canada has an obligation to warn its citizens about privacy and security risks that these CCP EVs
Sorry for interrupting. Your time is up. Maybe you can come back in the second round. So,
can I just get a written response? Can I get a written response
if
to that question?
possible.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
On the question of transparency, sure, we can come back to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now proceed to MP Deschamps-Ontario for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame Kyriazis.
Thank you, Ms. Kyriazis. My question is going to be dealing with research on science and technology. Are there challenges in Canada in terms of research? In other words, what is the type of research that's being done with respect to EVs in Canada at the present time?
Based on battery innovation, research and development, we actually are leaders in many ways on battery technology. Dalhousie houses one of the global experts on battery technology. I think historically, one of Canada's challenges is that we haven't been able to scale and commercialize the research that we have, initiated here. And one example, or before it ends up going kind of either to the U.S. or is exported abroad. And so one goal of this managed entry of Chinese EVs and the incentives that we're putting in place to try to attract Chinese investment is to bring some of that Chinese technology and know-how to Canada's manufacturing base so that we can learn from the market leaders and we can start to, pursue joint ventures like we are seeing happening in the EU to, focus on next generation battery technology development here or shared EV platform development. So that's the sort of thing we would be seeking in a partnership with Chinese companies coming into Canada. We want to set our EV battery sector up for success in the future.
Merci, et ça m'amène un peu à ma prochaine question.
Thank you. That brings me to my next question. In terms of innovation, there is talent, research talent in Canada. What would you say would be, over the next decade, the most important area of research for EVs? In your think tank, would you be able to fund it? Is it limited? What would you like to see in terms of EV research in the future?
So I think next generation battery technologies that either minimizes the use of, raw critical materials or maximizes the recyclability of those batteries and the raw materials would be one priority in light of critical mineral shortages and the, huge portion of the supply chain that China currently dominates when it comes to refined battery materials and rare earth materials. So, I think that next generation battery technology would be one. It might be around performance, a cold weather performance, something that's a little bit more specific to Canada's climate and the EVs and batteries that are, rolling the streets in Canada. Another might be charging times. Chinese companies are leaders where they're looking at charging times of 5 minutes at this point, which, compete with how quickly it is to fill up your car at the gas station. We'd love to see some more of the research and innovation around that being done here in Canada.
Merci. D'ailleurs,
thank you. Just to continue on. We know that countries like China are leaders in EV, and Norway as well, and other countries around the world as well. There's a great deal of research being carried on. Is there some other type of learning that we can draw from abroad in Canada that would help us over coming decades to better our position?
So in addition to battery chemistry itself, I think battery production processes are another area where China is a leader. Ford Motor Company is actually licensing China CATL's battery production technology to build its batteries in the Michigan plant in the U.S. that would go into its more affordable, $30,000 pickup truck that Ford is working on. Another area could be charging technology and ensuring interoperability of different, charging standards. Vehicle to grid could be another area that Canada could focus on. But I think a lot of it would look at localizing production and developing EVs and batteries that make sense for the Canadian and North American market, because really there's a dearth of options that are affordable and that integrate the best technology in North America right now.
Vous avez mentionné donc un défi qu'on a, c'est au niveau de la commercialisation.
You spoke about the need for marketing and research in Canada. How can we improve on both?
Well, I think it's leveraging our current research, innovation, and development capacities here in Canada. Again, like I said, we have a lot of leadership, but we struggle to scale. And so we do need to have some of those anchor investments in manufacturing here in Canada. And ideally, we would not be satellite offices for car companies that are headquartered elsewhere and then just assemble the final products here. Ideally, we would be clustering, Canadian universities and our research and development, along with some of these manufacturing facilities, whether it's final vehicle assembly or battery cell or battery materials. Canada has a lot of
Sorry for interrupting. Time
opportunities.
is up. Okay, thank you. We will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci. Première question pour monsieur.
Thank you. Question for Mr. Dufresne. Thank you for joining us today. You have explained that there's a connection, that the vehicles are actually connected to the internet, and there's a collection of data. Can Canada know whether or not these data will be transported abroad? Well, thank you for your question. With the present system, we are making investments in research to improve what we have. There are conditions have to exist. There has to be appropriate consent. But where there are gaps is this modernization, not just with respect to these vehicles, but also in terms more broadly of the transfer of data across borders. In Quebec, there has to be assessments about the factors relative to the privacy of the protection of privacy, and that should be the same elsewhere. There should be, in terms of greater risk, sort of standing conditions, permanent conditions beforehand, and there should be orders that could be issued as well as fines. So that modernizing in this way would be beneficial in the context. So what is the government saying to you? Because I'm sure that you've submitted all your recommendations to the government. To date, I can say that the Minister of AI has recently indicated that it's in the planning, and we'll see what's going to happen. All right. Well, we will see. We will have that planning to analyze and surveil. Can you speak to this, the risks in terms of normal use of these vehicles? What are the risks when they when the data is revealed abroad? Well, it could deal with just a question of risk for the vehicles per se. Do Canadians know the extent of the data that is being harvested? Do they know how timely it is? And also, it can cross border. And so it would become subject, this data, to potentially different rules in another country. So people are so confronted with technology in their lives that perhaps they haven't had the time to fully become aware of this. It's a responsibility for government to bring it to their attention and for our office and so on to make it more user-friendly. Yes, you've talked about the opacity, the opaqueness of the rules in certain instances. Well, do Canadians really realize what's being collected and who can have access to it? Well, I can say it could be done better. In coming months, coming weeks, I hope that there will be something there that will allow us to speak more concretely. We can explore it, what can be done, and when that happens, I'm ready to make recommendations. Microphone, please. Microphone. You said it, that the data are complex and it's also very difficult to predict. It has to be appropriate. There have to be safeguards. What are the mechanisms to safeguard the data? Can the data be stolen? So you have to know what's happening. You have to know what the consequences are. But it's a responsibility for businesses as well. You can say you manage that yourself. You agreed to it, so be it. No, businesses have a burden to bear as well to safeguard this data for Canadians. Do you feel then that all of this should be required before the facilitation of this type of technology on the Canadian market? Well, I think that there should be a power to issue orders with respect to these matters. There are confidential cases, instances where it could be problematic. It might be less pertinent in the context of EVs themselves, but privacy is a priority. It has to be clear. It has to be more user-friendly. It is something that I will continue to make general recommendations about. Well, you're a guard dog, but you make recommendations, and are there any sanctions? Well, no. There is, of course, recourse to the courts, but it takes a long time and it's costly. People do have that option, but it is, as I say, lengthy, expensive for people to go that way. For example, in the instance of Pornhub, there were some real problems about explicit consent for images that were themselves very explicit. So the ability to issue orders against it would better protect Canadians against something like this.
Thanks a lot. Time is up for MP Blanchet-Jonca. We will start our second round of questioning, and we will begin with MP Baldinelli for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I'm going to go to Mr. Dufresne. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that there could be an increased risk of access or use of personal information, including access by foreign courts, law enforcement, and national security authorities. So are you concerned that Canadian data collected by Chinese EVs could be potentially transmitted back to China and stored in Chinese state government data centers where they could be accessed by the Chinese state?
Well, that is a possibility in this context. It's not only in this context. For example, when I investigated TikTok with my counterparts from Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia, this is one of the issues that came up, that the data could leave Canada and could be held in China, could be accessed by the Chinese government. So we made a specific recommendation in that case to say there needs to be more transparency, and Canadians should be told much more explicitly that this is a risk.
To follow up on that, and you mentioned about you making that recommendation that PIPEDA be updated to specifically address transborder data flows. So where is that recommendation? Has it been implemented? Is the government considering that now?
That recommendation has not yet been implemented, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the government will do in its proposal for law reform of Privacy Act. So that's one of my recommendations. It should be there.
Recommendation made.
This has been a consistent recommendation of my office for a number of years, but I've certainly reiterated it in the last few months to the department.
You also mentioned in your remarks, you talk about my office also works closely with our international counterparts to help advance trusted, safe, and secure cross-border flows of personal information. So is the Chinese Communist Party, the state of China, are they involved in those talks?
Those talks involve the privacy commissioners of those countries. That China is not involved in that. But I can say that amongst the privacy community, there is certainly a consensus view that we need data to cross borders. We need it to be done safely and with respect to the rule of law and privacy principles.
Earlier, we had a witness, Michael Korvig, and when he appeared in February with the International Trade Committee, he said this: it's absolutely necessary, if Canada is going to allow these vehicles into the country in any quantity, to consult the appropriate security agencies, the CSE and CSIS, to establish what parameters are necessary for it to make it secure. So has the government talked to your office? Do you know that they've talked to some of the security agencies?
They have not talked to me about this specific arrangement. I am assuming that they're in communication with the security agencies. I don't know that for a fact. But again, to give the example of the TikTok case that I was directly involved in, the government then, security agencies, made some conclusions and made some directives that this could not be used by government employees and government devices for security perspective. So that was their responsibility. That continues to be their responsibility. What I do is when I hear these public conclusions, then I'll act on them from a privacy standpoint.
Following up on that then, so would you, in terms of making recommendations, would you then say, would you feel comfortable for government employees driving Chinese EVs, government cabinet ministers driving EVs, and would you yourself feel comfortable driving a Chinese EV?
Well, that would be a conclusion to be made by the national security authorities. So looking at, do they have concerns from that standpoint? In the case of TikTok, they did. And they made that finding, they made those rules, and so government employees could not use those devices. So that's something that's within their purview, and I would certainly act on their advice on that.
So in your capacity in your office, do you think Canada and Canadians are ready or even aware that these Chinese EVs and their ability to take data, store data, and transmit data offshore to places such back into China? Would Canadians, are they even aware of that issue?
Well, we are going to do more work so that Canadians are aware of the issue of data generally used by cars and by car devices. So that's the research that we've been sponsoring. I think that there needs to be more awareness of that, and also more awareness of the cross-border nature of it. I think that that's something we'll be continuing to amplify.
Just to clarify, so has any cabinet ministers or their staff approached and contacted your office since this announcement to vet or consider these privacy concerns involving Chinese EVs?
No, not specific to this situation.
Madam Chair, how much time do I have left?
6 seconds.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, we will proceed to MP McKelvey for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is for Mr. Dufresne. You have 2 studies that are underway, both related to automobiles. Are EVs included in those studies? So would those recommendations also be relevant for electric vehicles?
They would, because one of them is going to be looking at what type of permissions and consent are obtained by Canadians when they're using the onboard navigation of their cars. So that would apply to EV cars. It would also apply to non-EV cars. So is too much data being collected? Is it safe? Are the consent appropriate? So these types of things would certainly be relevant to EVs, also non-EVs. And the second is going to be about how can we use technology to protect privacy? And that's a really key issue for me and for my office. Understand that can we take the data, because data is useful to make decisions, to make cars safer and so on, but make it so that it's not possible to identify individuals. So we call those privacy-enhancing technologies, and they include technical tools, again, to be able to use the data but not have it attributed to someone. So again, I would think that the conclusions there and the recommendations are going to be things that are going to be applicable across the board.
And recognizing that we are on the Science and Research Committee and we will have a report from this, do you see areas, and maybe will your recommendations on your report touch on areas that are needed to invest in for science, or to like research that needs to be done on these important issues of privacy, both in vehicles, but also, on a wider scale?
Right. Well, in terms of the science, we have our contribution program where we can fund research on given areas. So this was one of the priorities last year, was to say connected devices and the information that they're gleaning from Canadians. So that's one way where we can support science, and certainly we'll make sure that this committee is kept informed of those results and those conclusions. We're doing upcoming ones on the gaming, video games, and how information, particularly of kids, are being used. So that's a real opportunity there. And then The other area where I would say the science is very relevant is my recommendation that the law should be amended to talk more directly about de-identification and anonymization of data. That's one of the key issues where we can use technology to say we need to use data, we need to make better decisions, it's good for the economy and safety and so on, but we don't need to know who it's about. And that's what those technologies do, and science plays a key part of that. Science also, of course, very relevant to AI and quantum and cryptography, which are key issues for the economy and for national security. So we're involved in this field, and again, happy to update your committee as it progresses.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Kriezis. It is Earth Month, so we are recognizing all things environment this month, and certainly electric vehicles, are one of those initiatives that can green our planet and contribute to action on climate change. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to, beyond the electric vehicles themselves, with your organization, with clean energy, with electrification, with expansion of the electricity grids. So what are those big investments that we need to be making as a country as we go through this transition?
So absolutely, we want to work to electrify everything that we can in Canada, particularly because Canada already has a relatively clean grid with over 80% of our electricity coming from clean sources. So electrifying transportation, whether it's personal vehicles that you and I drive or the delivery vans rolling through our communities, transit buses, large heavy-duty trucks, all of that is a priority. Electrifying heating systems in our buildings is another one. We just put out a major survey showing that heat pump owners in Canada love their heat pumps and would recommend them, over 90% would recommend them to their friends. That's another key area that we should be looking at the household level. Both EVs and heat pumps help save Canadian households money on their energy bills on a monthly basis. And then we also want to be electrifying our industries. And so, Canada's a leader in mine electrification already. We can produce electric vehicles and batteries that are some of the cleanest in the world. We are capable of producing green steel, low carbon aluminum, and already do. And those should be investments we continue to make. Maybe I should also say, and transmission lines that, connect the grid across Canada, because ultimately, if we want to enhance our energy security, we want to be relying on Canadian homegrown electricity and increase the trade of that electricity across provinces as much as we can.
Thank you. And we will now proceed to MP Blanchet-Jonca for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is very relevant to mine. Well, are Canadians willing to exchange their privacy to get a cheaper car? Well, this is part of the experience of car buying now. They have to face questions about privacy. But it's important, though, that the questions are posed in the right way, that it's clear. They're not really going to exchange their privacy for a cheaper car or anything else. You renounce the protection of your privacy to get a cheaper car, or no, I don't believe that. I think Canadians can have both. They can save money and they can have privacy. But, there's sovereignty and independence. When you have that, you want to build a more independent economy. So on the basis of data, who would control access to that data? Would it be Canadians, or we would be able to? Issues that are very important for national security would be protected, whether it's in Canada or elsewhere. There would be mechanisms to reach an agreement. Now, that's a general statement, of course, but to come back to privacy and the recommendations I make, it's very important that Canadian principles follow the Canadian data, that Canadians know that they are protected, that there is no risk, because you lose sovereignty over your data if there isn't a strong mechanism to protect it. Companies have to do this through contract, you might say, but it's not sufficient. It has to be something more rigorous. So potential access, greater access from abroad would be a potential risk for Canadians. Well, yes, but it could be controlled. There has to be a mechanism for strong protection. The Act has to be very strong about it, as is the case in Europe and in Quebec.
Now we will proceed to MP Ho for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for the Privacy Commissioner. Modern electric vehicles collect and transmit significant volumes of personal and geolocation data. So in your assessment, do current Canadian privacy laws and government policy adequately protect Canadians in this context?
Well, I think that they can be strengthened. I think that they provide certainly important protections for Canadians, and I'm going to continue to apply those laws as they exist. But I am hoping that government and Parliament will modernize private sector privacy law on a number of fronts. We need stronger enforcement rules. It's quite a notable gap that Canada, almost alone, we lack the ability for my office to issue orders or to issue fines. We lack a cross-border data transfer rule regime that is as rigorous as, say, Europe or Quebec or other jurisdictions. We rely a little bit too much on contracts for that. There's opportunities to strengthen privacy's role as a fundamental right, privacy of children. Technical aspects like de-identification, anonymization, those are key things that can help fuel AI and innovation. So I think that there's opportunities there to strengthen the legal regime.
So has your office, or have you or your office or your team conducted or commissioned any assessment of the data collection practices of foreign-made connected vehicles, including Chinese-made EVs?
We have not done research specific to one jurisdiction or one company, but we have funded research to look at the general practices right now in terms of Canadian buying cars and what type of information is being asked of them, how they consent, how it's being used, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to making those public very soon. One of them talks about the consent practices and the use of the data. The other talks about how we can use technology to further protect Canadians' data while allowing good decisions being made with data use. So those are the recent projects that I look forward to sharing with you.
And we certainly look forward to reviewing those findings as they come public. Has the government ever consulted you or your office about the privacy concerns related to Chinese-made EVs specifically?
No, I've not been consulted on this specific file.
So in your opinion, do you think the Canadian public, the average Canadian, is sufficiently informed about the scope of the data being collected by these connected vehicles and where that data is ultimately stored?
I would say at a very high level, I would say the answer is no. I think generally speaking, I find that the consent and the information sharing for Canadians in terms of their privacy in many cases could be stronger. That's a key part of our work in Canada and with international partners. We're trying to always encourage clearer, easier to understand consent policies. We were in the Supreme Court with Facebook recently on that issue about how consent should be obtained and how transparency is done. I talked about my investigation of TikTok, and that's an area where, again, we found it wasn't transparent enough. The fact that the data was going to China could be accessed by the Chinese government. We asked this to be reinforced. So we're going to continue to push to make it easier for Canadians to have that awareness.
So have you worked with any Canadian security or intelligence agencies regarding the data risks linked to these vehicles so far?
Not in this specific context, but we have discussions at high level, again, with cybersecurity authorities, national security, in terms of the balancing of privacy and national security, but not on this specific topic.
So, to the best of your knowledge, of course, you're not an international law expert, but can Canadian user data collected by foreign-made EVs be accessed by foreign governments under their domestic laws?
Well, I think as a general proposition, foreign countries have laws that in some cases will allow them to have access to citizens' data, the same way that Canada does. Canada's laws also will allow foreign companies' data to be taken. I think the key, this is why there's so much work being done internationally, when we talk about data-free flow with trust, the solution isn't to say data cannot share borders.
Are you concerned about those potential extraterritorial overreach at all? Yes or no?
Well, I'm concerned in terms of the cross-border data transfers to the extent that I would want stronger Canadian transparency and other provisions in there.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up. We will now end this panel with MP de Ontario for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Kriasis, I do have some more questions about research. I come from a rural riding, and I see what research has brought us with. I wonder about research on EVs, how that could help us in rural areas. How can you develop the infrastructure that will be necessary? You know, if you compare that to urban centers, I want to hear you on this subject, rural versus urban.
Sure. One thing I might want to point to is just, again, what's going on in the EU as something that Canada can look for. So we are seeing a number of investments in local production and partnerships on research and technology. For example, Chery, the Chinese car company, EV company, is starting to assemble cars in Barcelona through a joint venture with Spanish car maker Ebro. They are using a shared production platform and shared technology. Chery is also opening an R&D center in Catalonia to design and adapt vehicles for Europe. Another example is SAIC-owned MG has opened an engineering center in Frankfurt and has unveiled its new semi-solid state battery that's developed specifically for the European market. And then last, Stellantis has partnered with Leap Motor, a Chinese EV company, where they're going to be building a compact electric SUV in Spain, and they've created a new company called Lidar Automotive that's set up to supply the factory with European-made components. It's a joint venture between a Chinese technology company and a Spanish supplier. These are some examples of the types of partnerships that we should be exploring in Canada to meet some of Canada's specific needs, including those in more rural communities.
Merci, et j'aimerais aussi vous amener.
Thank you. I'd like to bring you back to something that was said earlier with respect to electric networks. What is the impact on a large scale of research that is being done? We know that we want I represent New Brunswick, and we know that there is a consequence on the capacity of what's being offered. So do you have something to say about that?
On the capacity of research that's being offered?
No, what is research bringing us in terms of the capacity of our electric networks, in the provinces? Does it vary from one to the other? We in New Brunswick are doing work, but there is more work to be done for our electric capacity. So what remains to be done in Canada and in the provinces?
Sure. So each province has its own kind of regional specificity and strengths. You know, in Alberta, we're seeing emerging battery leaders that are finding ways to extract lithium from wastewater brines from oil fields. In British Columbia, there is leadership in battery recycling. In Manitoba and Quebec, we're seeing, you know, leadership on electric, medium, and heavy-duty vehicle development. Yeah, depending on the province, this is a pan-Canadian opportunity. We should continue to invest in research, but I think we also need to be exploring partnerships with world EV leaders, whether it's China or whether it's Germany or South Korea. And these are, you know, some of the other partnerships that the federal government is currently exploring and make sense as we're trying to diversify away from the U.S. and remain competitive in a global auto sector that's quickly moving towards electric.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Everybody, with this panel comes to an end, and I really want to thank both our witnesses for appearing before this committee and providing your important testimony. And is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Yes. Okay. Thank you once again, and the meeting is adjourned.